I came home to help wrap Christmas gifts. Instead, I found my fiancée on the floor with a guy, half naked under wrapping paper. He said, "Dude, wrong room," when she scrambled up. I came home earlier than planned because my mother had asked if I could help wrap the last batch of Christmas gifts before the family dinner. She always overbought presents and then panicked at the end of the week when she realized how many had to be wrapped. I told her I would swing by after I checked on the apartment because I thought Mara, my fiancée, might need help with the decorations she had scattered across the living room earlier that morning. She wanted everything to look picture-perfect for the Christmas Eve gathering, and the apartment reflected that tension. Ribbons on the dining table, rolls of wrapping paper leaning against the couch, and a half-assembled garland she insisted would tie the whole theme together. When I stepped through the door, I thought she was in the kitchen because I heard movement. I dropped the small box of gifts on the entryway table and walked toward the sound. The living room came into view, and the first thing that caught my eye was a roll of metallic red wrapping paper stretched across the floor, like someone had dragged it while unspooling it. That didn't alarm me. The noise behind the couch did. I stepped forward and saw Mara on the rug with another man. Not sitting, not talking. Both of them half undressed, tangled in torn wrapping paper as if they had been rolling through it. She scrambled in a panic, sliding across the slick pieces of paper, while he pushed himself up and reached for his shirt. The scene didn't confuse me. It erased something inside me so fast that I couldn't even find the right reaction. There was only a wave of heat and an instinct to walk backward until the room felt less claustrophobic. The man tried to shrug it off with a dismissive explanation that made the entire moment even more surreal. Mara's face went pale, and she grabbed for anything to cover herself. The way she looked at him, then at me, told me everything. She wasn't shocked he was there. She was shocked that I walked in early. I didn't confront them. Not fully. Not then. I simply looked at the floor, then at the door, and left. Mara called after me, but her voice barely registered. My hands were shaking, not because of heartbreak, but because I realized something heavier. That scene didn't feel spontaneous. That was not two people who made a sudden mistake. That was routine. Outside, the December air bit at my face. Snow clung to the sidewalk in uneven clumps. I walked without direction for several minutes, pacing the block, trying to decide how much of my life I was willing to question. When I finally went back inside, the apartment was spotless. Mara had cleaned everything. The wrapping paper was gone. The rug had been flipped. The windows were cracked open as if she was trying to change the air itself. She stood near the counter, fully dressed, pretending not to be trembling. She attempted to guide the conversation toward excuses, but every sentence she offered contradicted the one before it. She insisted that nothing serious happened and claimed the guy, whose name she now provided as Lewis, had misunderstood her signals. She said he had shown up unexpectedly. She insisted he tried to kiss her first. She claimed she pushed him away. She said a dozen different things that overlapped in a way that revealed none of it was true. I didn't argue point by point. Something in her behavior told me that debating details would turn into a loop of shifting explanations. Instead, I asked her how long she had known him. She said she barely knew him. I asked her why he was comfortable being half undressed in our home. She said he misread her invitation. I asked her why he knew the layout of our apartment well enough to move freely into the living room instead of standing in the entryway. She didn't answer that one. She just collapsed onto the couch and buried her face in her hands as if the act itself would blur everything that happened. The silence felt heavier than her explanations. I stepped away from the conversation and walked toward the balcony door, needing distance again. The apartment lights reflected off the glass, creating a faint double image of myself beside the falling snow outside. That reflection looked like someone watching the moment from a distance, not living it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't expect anyone to contact me at that hour, so the vibration cut sharply into the moment. It was a number I didn't recognize. Normally I'd ignore it, but something compelled me to read it. The message was short and direct. Someone claimed they had seen Mara last week with the same guy at a holiday event across town. A place she told me she couldn't attend because she had picked up an evening shift. The person said they remembered her because she wore a distinctive dark red scarf and kept her hand on the guy's arm while they browsed the market stalls. They remembered because the man introduced her as his partner to someone selling crafts. I didn't respond. I stood still while the words sank in, heavy and cold. The image that formed in my mind wasn't dramatic. It was devastating in a quiet, factual way. It meant the scene I walked in on wasn't an accident or a temporary lapse in judgment. It wasn't even the first time. It was established enough that strangers could identify them together in public. When I returned to the living room, Mara looked up at me with tear-reddened eyes. She seemed ready to explain again, but something in my expression stopped her. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I only asked a single, simple question about that holiday event. She froze because she understood instantly that I had information she hadn't expected me to have. She tried to adjust the story again, but her new version contradicted everything she had said before. I realized then that I had crossed a threshold. There was no confusion left, only clarity. Mara had built a parallel life and thought she could maintain it through the holidays. She hadn't just cheated. She had curated a schedule that allowed her to alternate between me and this man while hiding behind Christmas commitments and work shifts. I felt something steady settle inside my chest. Not anger, not grief, just resolve. I told her I needed time, and I left again. She didn't follow me this time. She didn't call. The hallway felt eerily calm as I stepped into it, as though the building itself knew the truth before I did. Downstairs, I sat in the dim lobby near the artificial Christmas tree the building manager set up every year. The ornaments were mismatched and the lights flickered at random intervals, but the steady glow was grounding. The entire situation began to reshape itself in my mind. The accidental discovery wasn't the real shock. The shock was realizing how seamlessly Mara had integrated that man into moments of her life I never questioned. The message from the stranger replayed in my head. The description was too specific to misinterpret. I knew that the only way forward was to investigate how far this betrayal went, not by snooping or rehearsing detective tactics, but by holding her explanations to the standard of reality. The truth would come out if I approached it logically instead of emotionally. That was the private bet I made with myself. If I pursued the truth to its end, the relationship would not survive. The only question was whether I was ready to accept that before Christmas Eve. When I woke the next morning, the apartment felt unnaturally quiet. Mara had slept on the far edge of the bed, stiff and tense, as if physical distance could undo the night before. I stayed still for several minutes, watching the light seep through the curtains, trying to decide how the day should begin. She stirred slightly, sensing that I was awake, and pretended to reach for her phone as though checking work messages would make everything normal again. I could feel her waiting for me to speak first. I didn't. I left the room, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table. I stared at the steam rising from the mug while sorting through what I had learned. Her explanations had collapsed under the weight of a single text from a stranger, and that alone was enough to guide my next steps. I needed clarity, not apologies. Not emotional swings. Not looping conversations that shifted every time I asked a question. Mara eventually walked into the kitchen, trying to move quietly, almost rehearsing a calm demeanor. She sat across from me and acted as though the day was beginning normally. She asked what time I planned to visit my parents for the gift wrapping session. She even brought up Christmas Eve dinner and suggested we leave earlier than usual so we could help arrange the seating. I listened carefully, not because I cared about the logistics, but because I wanted to understand how she viewed the situation. Her behavior made one thing clear. She intended to compress the discovery of her affair into a momentary disruption that she could smooth over by moving forward quickly and performing holiday enthusiasm. I responded with questions instead of arguments. I asked her again how she knew Louis. She repeated the same evasive phrases from the night before. I asked why the stranger had recognized them at the market. She claimed mistaken identity. I watched her eyes each time she shifted an explanation, and the pattern remained identical. She wasn't trying to convince me. She was trying to outrun the truth. By late morning, she left for a shift she claimed she couldn't skip. When the door shut behind her, the apartment felt like a stage after the actors had departed. Props remained. Wrapping paper. Decorations. A holiday playlist still paused on the TV from the night before. Nothing matched the reality underneath. I walked down to the lobby, intending to speak to the building manager. Not to dig through logs like a detective, but to ask a simple question. Whether guests had to sign in recently. The manager knew me well enough to answer directly. He mentioned that someone had been checking in under a first name only, claiming they were visiting a resident on the 5th floor. We lived on the 5th floor. The description matched Louis immediately. He had signed in twice in the past week. Once late evening. Once early afternoon. I thanked the manager and stepped outside into the cold. Snow had started to fall again. Thin flakes drifting slowly as if the weather itself didn't want to commit to a full storm yet. I walked a few blocks, passing the same holiday market where families bought ornaments and hot drinks. The contrast between the festive crowd and the hollow feeling in my chest only sharpened the situation. Mara had used this season as camouflage. Holiday tasks. Family events. Shifts that didn't exist. Traditions that hid her absences. I sat on a bench near the corner and replayed the timeline. If Louis had been here multiple times, then the night I caught them wasn't spontaneous. It meant the messages from the stranger aligned with documented visits. It meant Mara had crafted an entire schedule to manage both relationships while assuming I was too preoccupied with work and holiday commitments to notice anything unusual. The realization didn't make me angry. It created a calm, steady type of determination. When I returned home, the apartment remained untouched since morning. I called a friend who lived in the building across the street, someone who often noticed comings and goings from our floor because his window faced ours. I asked a general question about whether he had seen any unfamiliar faces recently. He paused for a long moment before saying that he had seen the same man entering the building a few times during afternoons when Mara claimed she was working late. That alignment told me everything I needed to know. Not about her emotional motivations or the complexity of her behavior, just about the factual structure of her actions. By early afternoon, I had enough clarity to form a plan. I didn't intend to catch her again or create a dramatic confrontation. The goal was simple: establish the truth from multiple sources so that when I eventually spoke, there would be no room for another shifting narrative. What I lacked was context from the other side of the situation, the man who had been in my apartment. I didn't expect to see him again. I assumed he would avoid contact entirely. That assumption lasted until late afternoon when a knock sounded at the door. I opened it and found Lewis standing in the hallway, fidgeting with nervous energy. He wasn't confident or dismissive this time. He looked genuinely unsettled. He asked if we could talk. I stepped aside because I understood instinctively that the information he held mattered. He entered the living room like someone walking into a courtroom. He avoided the rug where everything had happened, almost as if stepping on that space would make the memory sharper. He began explaining, not defensively but cautiously. His version of events was shockingly different from Mara's. According to him, she told him she and her fiancé were separated. She claimed they were only living together temporarily for financial reasons. She said they were in the middle of deciding whether to end things. She also insisted that I didn't want to participate in Christmas activities and that she felt lonely during the season. Every detail clashed with reality. He spoke as someone who had been manipulated, not someone who was proudly engaging in a secret relationship. He admitted he stayed silent when I walked in because he had no idea she was still engaged. He said he panicked when he realized the truth. The more he explained, the more I recognized the pattern. Mara had created a separate version of her life for each of us, using just enough truth to make each lie seem plausible. Lewis's explanation triggered the next major shift in perspective. For the first time, I saw how wide the gap was between the story she told him and the story she told me. This wasn't a simple affair. This was a double framework relationship where she positioned herself differently depending on who she was talking to. The strongest indicator that he wasn't lying was his fear. Not fear of me. Fear of the repercussions of having been misled into betraying someone unknowingly. He apologized and left quickly, clearly wanting no part of the chaos anymore. When the door clicked shut behind him, the silence in the apartment felt different. Not empty, not numbing, just full of answers I didn't have before. Mara returned later in the evening, carrying a bag of groceries and attempting to act cheerful. She set things on the counter and began describing holiday recipes she wanted to try. She talked about appetizers. She talked about matching outfits for Christmas Eve pictures. She talked at a rapid pace, trying to fill the space with anything other than the truth. Her behavior confirmed that she planned to push forward into the holiday as if nothing needed to be addressed. She assumed the situation could be buried under decorations, gift exchanges, and family traditions. I let her speak for a while because I needed to watch how far she would extend the performance. She moved around the kitchen with deliberate cheerfulness, rearranging ingredients and humming lightly under her breath. She wanted to create enough noise to drown out the tension. It didn't work. When she finally asked if I could help her with the ingredients, I told her calmly that we needed to talk after dinner preparations. She froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough to reveal she understood the conversation she had been avoiding all day was now unavoidable. Mara stood frozen at the counter for a long breath before turning around, pretending she hadn't reacted. She forced a steady tone as she resumed arranging ingredients, but her movements had lost the artificial rhythm she used earlier to mask her panic. She knew the conversation she had hoped to delay until after Christmas could no longer be postponed. I stayed in the living room, giving her space while reviewing the new information I held. Her affair was only one part of the truth. The larger issue was the pattern of deception she had constructed to manage two different lives. She finished preparing the ingredients and stepped into the living room as if walking toward an exam she hadn't studied for. She sat on the far end of the couch, smoothing her hands across her knees, waiting for me to begin. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her in a series of rapid demands. I simply asked for the full timeline. Her reaction revealed more than her words. Her shoulders tightened, her gaze lowered, and her breathing became shallow. She began with vague phrases about confusion, miscommunication, and emotional uncertainty. Each sentence drifted away from the point and returned with a different shape. I listened until I realized she was building a defensive structure, not offering clarity. When I asked again about the timeline, she shifted strategies and claimed she had known Lewis only casually. She said she invited him over because she felt lonely while I worked long hours. She said she never intended for anything to happen and described the moment I walked in as a lapse in judgment, not a planned meeting. She spoke as if rehearsing a narrative she hoped would gain traction if she layered enough soft edges around it. I told her calmly about the building logs that showed he had visited twice before. Her face changed, not dramatically, but enough to reveal that she wasn't expecting me to have tangible information. She recovered quickly, trying to suggest that the manager must have mistaken someone else for him. That explanation didn't hold. I told her about the stranger's message describing their outing at the holiday market. This time her reaction was sharper. She leaned back and exhaled slowly, realizing that the account was too specific to dismiss. Her response took a new turn. She claimed she went to the market only to clear her head, and that running into Lewis had been unexpected. She insisted nothing significant happened. The pattern repeated. Each new detail undermined her previous claim. The contradictions layered themselves until the structure of her story collapsed under its own weight. She shifted again, now attempting to move the focus toward the stress of the season. She said she had been overwhelmed. She said she felt isolated. She said the holidays created pressure she struggled to manage. None of it addressed the core issue. She had constructed an alternate life and sustained it long enough for people outside our circle to recognize it. When she realized I wasn't engaging with her diversions, her tone hardened. She asked why I was interrogating her instead of working through the issue together. She framed the situation as a misunderstanding that I was inflating. She attempted to redirect the conversation toward reconciliation by bringing up years of history, shared plans, and the engagement. It was a strategic shift, not an emotional one. She was trying to overwhelm the problem with memories and future expectations. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again. Another unfamiliar number. I opened the message with caution, expecting either spam or a wrong number. Instead, it was a woman identifying herself as Lewis's sister. Her name was Elena, and she said she had learned what happened after speaking to her brother. She wanted to talk to me directly before he made any decisions. Her message included a few details that made my chest tighten. She said Mara had contacted her family earlier in the month. That alone didn't make sense. There was no reason for Mara to reach out to them. I stepped into the hallway to call Elena. Her voice carried the kind of composed urgency that comes from someone who has pieced together enough fragments to realize a larger pattern. She told me that Mara had reached out to her mother weeks prior, expressing concerns about my emotional stability. She said Mara portrayed me as unpredictable and difficult to communicate with. She claimed Mara hinted that I was preventing her from ending an unhappy engagement. Lewis's family had been under the impression that Mara was gradually separating from me and that she needed support during that transition. The information rearranged the entire situation in my mind. Mara had not only created separate narratives for me and Lewis, she had extended them outward to other families. She had built a platform of lies that allowed her to operate without suspicion. Elena sounded apologetic, as though she felt responsible for not recognizing the inconsistencies earlier. She explained that her brother had believed Mara because she presented herself as trapped in a relationship she didn't know how to leave. According to Elena, Mara used vulnerability as a shield, claiming she feared my reaction if she attempted to end things. I thanked her for telling me and ended the call because I needed a moment to steady myself. The hallway felt colder than before. The building's holiday garland hung loosely on the wall, and one of the lights flickered. I saw the entire dynamic clearly now. Mara wasn't having a trivial affair. She was replacing me in stages. She had introduced Lewis into her life not as a secret lover, but as an intended partner. She created false narratives to justify her actions to anyone who questioned her. She was preparing for a transition she planned to execute after the holidays, once the gifts, events, and family gatherings had passed. When I returned to the living room, Mara watched me with wide eyes. She sensed something had shifted. She asked who called, and I told her. She didn't react with confusion. She reacted with panic. She stood quickly and began pacing, repeating fragmented defenses that didn't align with any coherent explanation. She tried to frame Elena as meddling. She claimed Lewis misunderstood her intentions. She insisted she never maligned me to anyone. The unraveling happened faster than her ability to contain it. She slipped several times, contradicting earlier statements. She admitted she had felt unsure about the engagement months ago. She admitted she enjoyed the attention Lewis gave her. She said she never planned for things to escalate. She added that she didn't think our relationship was strong enough to withstand a straightforward confession. Each admission revealed a deeper truth she had tried to bury. She sat down abruptly, as if her legs gave out. She looked at the floor, gripping the edge of the couch cushion, her breathing uneven. The kitchen timer beeped faintly from the counter, forgotten in the middle of the chaos. The sound felt strangely symbolic. Something was overdue. She asked what I planned to do now. Her voice had lost its earlier confidence. It wasn't a plea. It was a calculation. She wanted to assess what options remained. That question marked the moment I knew the relationship couldn't continue. Not because of moral judgment, because the foundation was gone. Every explanation she offered fractured upon contact with reality. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't outline a dramatic decision. I only said that we would speak after Christmas Eve and that I needed time to prepare for the gathering. She looked surprised because she expected a confrontation or a resolution right then. Instead, she received silence. That silence weighed heavier than anything I could have said. She moved toward the bedroom as if retreating, closing the door behind her with a soft click. The apartment felt motionless. The lights from the small artificial tree cast dim reflections across the floor. I stood in the living room and knew what had to happen next. The only place the truth could land without distortion was in front of both families. That was where her narratives would collide, and her contradictions would reveal themselves without any help from me. I began preparing for that moment with complete clarity. The gathering wasn't going to be a celebration anymore. It was going to be the place where everything she constructed finally collapsed. Christmas Eve arrived with a cold, windless sky that felt heavier than the snow resting on every rooftop. The morning unfolded quietly, but the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that develops after a storm breaks something open and everyone waits to see what remains standing. Mara moved around the apartment with restrained movements, tying her hair back, adjusting ornaments, wiping surfaces that didn't need attention. Every action looked like an attempt to reassemble the illusion she believed could still hold. I spent most of the morning preparing for the evening, not rehearsing lines or staging a dramatic reveal. Each step was practical. I gathered the building log confirming Lewis's visits. I organized the messages, including the one from the stranger and the one from Elena, into a clear timeline. I spoke with the neighbor again to confirm his account. I didn't embellish anything. I didn't interpret. I kept only verifiable details. I wanted no part of a he-said-she-said spectacle. The truth was efficient enough. By mid-afternoon, Mara approached me carefully. She asked if I still planned to attend the dinner. Her voice carried a strange mix of fear and hope, as if she believed the holiday atmosphere might absorb the tension and shift the direction of the day. I told her we would both be going. She nodded, but her expression tightened, understanding that the decision came with an outcome she couldn't control. We drove in near silence. Holiday lights reflected off the windshield as we passed houses decorated with animated reindeer, inflatable snowmen, and glowing icicles. The closer we got to my parents' home, the more restless Mara became. She smoothed her dress repeatedly, checked her phone, and stared at passing houses without really seeing them. She knew something was coming but didn't know the shape of it. My family greeted us with warmth, unaware of the fracture beneath the surface. The house smelled of roasted vegetables, cinnamon, and pine. My mother placed wrapped gifts under the tree while humming along to a Christmas playlist. My father adjusted the dining room chairs, occasionally stepping back to examine the seating arrangement. Everything appeared calm on the outside. Inside, my thoughts stayed steady and focused. We settled into the living room. Mara tried to participate in casual conversation, but her responses sounded hollow. She avoided my eyes. She avoided my mother's questions. She repositioned herself on the couch multiple times, unable to settle. My sister arrived shortly after with her husband and their young daughter, whose excitement filled the space with bouncing energy. For a moment, the normalcy felt almost surreal. Then the doorbell rang. I expected more extended family. Instead, when I opened the door, Lewis stood there with his hands shoved in his pockets, shoulders drawn tight, eyes uneasy but determined. Behind him stood a woman who resembled him, Elena. The cold air swirled inside with their arrival, turning several heads in the living room. Mara's reaction was immediate and unfiltered. She shot up from the couch and stared at them with disbelief that cracked through her controlled expression. She took a step forward as if to intercept them, then stopped abruptly, understanding that her two separate worlds had collided in my parents' doorway. I stepped aside and let them enter. My family watched the situation unfold with growing confusion. No one spoke. No one attempted to fill the silence. The moment held its own gravity. Lewis cleared his throat, glanced toward me for confirmation, then looked at my parents and introduced himself. His voice was strained but steady. He explained that he had come because he felt obligated to clarify the truth after discovering how deeply he had been misled. He stepped to the side so Elena could speak. She addressed my family directly. She described how Mara had reached out to her mother weeks earlier, portraying me as unstable and controlling, and insisting she needed help leaving me. She explained that the story had shaped their entire understanding of the relationship. Then she apologized to my parents for believing it. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father stared at Mara with a stunned, open expression that looked unlike anything I had seen on his face before. Mara tried to interrupt, but Elena continued, explaining how the contradictions in Mara's account only surfaced after Louis came home distressed from the incident he hadn't expected. When Elena finished, I added the facts I had gathered. The building logs, the messages, the witness who saw them together at the market, the timeline that contradicted every explanation Mara had offered me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't embellish anything. I presented the information the same way someone lays down cards in a quiet, final move. Mara attempted to salvage the situation by framing everything as a misunderstanding that escalated beyond her control. She said she never intended to harm anyone. She said she panicked. She tried redirecting responsibility by claiming she felt pressured by expectations of the engagement. None of it landed. Each explanation collided with the evidence resting in front of her. My sister asked a single question: why she lied to two families to create parallel narratives. Mara faltered. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Her eyes darted toward the floor, then toward Louis, then toward me. She didn't have an answer that could withstand the weight of the moment. Louis stepped forward and addressed her directly. He told her he wanted nothing further to do with someone who manufactured stories to manipulate people into fulfilling roles she hadn't earned. His voice trembled, not with anger, but with clarity. It was the kind of tone someone uses when they realize they were pulled into a situation where the ground was never stable. The room felt suspended in a held breath. My father broke the silence by asking me what I intended to do. I answered without hesitation. The engagement was over. There was no path forward when the entire foundation had been constructed on deception. Mara's legs seemed to weaken as she lowered herself onto a chair. Her hands covered her face as if she could block out the scene by refusing to see it. She tried searching for a way to retreat into another explanation, but there were no spaces left to escape into. The truth had reached every corner of the room. My mother escorted her outside to wait for a ride. Not out of sympathy, out of courtesy. No one wanted her near the holiday table after what had unfolded. She walked out slowly, shoulders slumped, unraveling the last threads of the story she had woven for months. Dinner felt different than any Christmas Eve before it. The atmosphere wasn't celebratory, but it wasn't somber either. It carried the quiet stability of a family who had just witnessed something painful but necessary. Louis and Elena didn't stay long, but before leaving, they thanked my parents for listening and apologized again for their part in the confusion. My father shook their hands, recognizing they had been misled as thoroughly as we had. After everyone went home, I returned to the apartment alone. Mara had already packed a few things and left a short note saying she would pick up the rest later. The space felt larger than usual, as if the absence of her double life had created a vacuum that pulled the tension out with it. Over the next week, the consequences landed exactly as expected. Mara moved out permanently. Her relationship with her family deteriorated once they learned what she had told others about me. The holiday schedule lies caught up to her at work when she couldn't reconcile her stories with the documented hours. Louis cut all contact and blocked her. Elena informed me that their family wanted nothing more to do with her. As for me, life didn't break. It steadied. The clarity of the situation allowed me to make decisions without emotional fog. My family supported me, not because they pitied me, but because they saw how calmly I had held everything together while the truth surfaced. I went through the days with a strange sense of lightness, not relief, but the absence of distortion. Reality felt clean again. The holidays ended, and the new year began without the engagement that once defined my future. Instead, I carried forward the understanding that some truths break a life open in order to rebuild it with stronger walls and clearer windows.